In the previous lesson, we looked at the simplest of the conditional structures being the if-then, and we have a block of code that's executed only if the condition is true. We have a variation of that, which is our second conditional structure, and that's an if-then-else. In the if-then-else, we have two processes, one of which is executed if the condition is true, and the other is executed if the condition is false. They both cannot be executed. It's one or the other. We write that structure in Visual Basic with the if statement and our Boolean conditional or Boolean expression. The word then, what we want to do if it's true, that's indented, and then the else, and what we want to do if it's false. Now that can be one statement, it could be a whole block of code, and then we conclude that with an end if. Let's go back and revisit that project we did in the last lesson, finding even or odd, and let's write it with an if then else condition instead. In the previous video, I created an application that found whether an integer was even or odd, and we used a if-then structure to do that by setting a default value before that if-then structure. Let's modify this a little bit. Let's modify this to instead use an if-then-else structure. I'm going to cut that statement out where I'm dimming status, instead put it in my if-then true fork. I'll change the even to odd. And then I'll do an else, and we'll say the status is even. Now, notice in doing that, I'm getting an error here on status. And it says status is not declared. The problem is I'm declaring status within these two forks, and Visual Basic is concerned that status doesn't exist outside of my conditional structure. So I could go ahead and dim status again up here at the top if I wanted. Or I think probably an even better way to do this is simplify this even more. And we'll just say that's odd. And we'll say that one is even. So two possible forks here. If my num mod 2 does not equal 0, we're going to say the number is odd. If it does equal 0, then that's an even number, and our output will be that it's even. So I evaluate, I get odd. If I see just 18, 18 is even. If we did a really large number, that's even, and that's odd. So one fork or the other will execute. Let's look at another example. The Red Ridge Library has a late penalty fee for items returned past their due date of $1.25 per item if it's returned within a week, but 65 cents per day per item if more than a week late. They want an application to calculate those fees, so we have a text box named txt items for the number of items. I did a date time picker that allows us to choose a calendar date, and this one is named DTP due, and another one DTP return, a button named BTN calc fee, and a label of LBL output. Let's take a look at the calc fees button. I put a comment to specify what the fees are, and then I dim items as integer. It's going to be the txt items.text cast as an integer. I set the flat fee and the daily fee as variables here. Could have certainly made them constants, but I do that here rather than in the code, so if I had any if the fees change, we're just changing it in one spot here. And it's easier to change those when they're up towards the top to find those. Then I have due date as DTP due.value and return date as DTP return.value. That'll get our two dates. I found the difference of those as a variable called lapsed, which is the time span, so subtracting due date from return date. And we're going to find the number of days in that lapsed period, so days overdue is an integer of lapsed.days. LBL output.text equals the number of days that are overdue, and then literal string of overdue, days overdue, and carriage return. And here's where we're using that if then else. So if the days overdue is less than or equal to 7, they've returned within a week, then LBL output.text, we're going to concatenate to the text that's there, so ampersand equals. I'm using a interpolated string, the $, the flat fee of. I'm going to insert the flat fee amount as a currency value, assessed for, and the number of items, and then the word items equals, and then I'm multiplying items times flat fee and displaying that as currency. However, see, we have a little typo here. If it's more than 7 days late, so days overdue is greater than 7, we're going to dim item fee as double as the days overdue times the daily fee. Our output is we're going to concatenate to the text of LBL output.text and interpolate a string of each item is assessed a daily late fee of, and that daily late fee shown as currency to 2 decimals, and that equates to what the item fee is to currency per item for a total amount due of, and again I'm calculating that amount on the fly here, of item fee times the number of items and setting that to display as currency. Let's watch this run. So I have 3 items. By the way, I set a form load, as you can see here, that I set the 2 calendar pickers, the date pickers, to the current date. So all we're assuming they're returning today. All we need to do is change the date that the items were due, and then click calculate fees. And we're told 4 days overdue. Flat fee of $1.25 assessed for 3 items is $3.75. If, however, I change this to be, these were due 10 days ago, we'll say the 16th. So 10 days overdue. Each item assessed a daily late fee of 65 cents. That equates to $6.50 per item, so 10 times 65. For a total amount due of, so that's $6.50 times 3 is $19.50. Everything seems to work. I did one other thing in my code, and that is I set a clear output that it's going to clear the output label text, just say enter the number of items, choose the due and return dates, and click the calc fees button. And that's going to occur if they change the number of items or they change either of the calendar dates. So that then is how we can use an if-then-else structure. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the Programming Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.